Good morning on this Sunday, July 2nd. Everybody hold on, we've got quite a show. Welcome to the Georgia Gang. More bombshell rulings from the U.S. Supreme Court, from affirmative action to student loans. Also, several new laws are now in effect in Georgia, including one that bans doctors from providing gender confirmation surgeries to minors. And remembering Dr. Christine King Ferris, the only surviving sibling of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., passed away this week at the age of 95. Melita, Phil, Theron, and Janelle are all here, and they are feisty. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
The U.S. Supreme Court ruled in a 6-3 decision that race-based policies in higher ed violate the Constitution's Equal Protections Clause. The U.S. Supreme Court is now forcing schools to rewrite their admissions policies, but the University System of Georgia says it will not impact its policies. In the landmark opinion, the High Court ruled colleges and universities can no longer use race as a factor to admit students, saying policies at the University of North Carolina and Harvard were discriminatory. The 6-3 decision split the court along ideological lines. Advocates, including President Biden, say they're afraid the ruling could lead to a drop in Black and Hispanic student enrollment.
We cannot let the decision be a permanent setback for the country.
Republicans, meanwhile, are applauding the court.
Look, we want to live in a colorblind society.
Some say this could be a major headache for colleges trying to diversify their student bodies.
Private institutions, public institutions will all have to go back to the drawing board, decide what and if any way they want to use race, how they can use race, consistent with today's decision, and then adopt those policies going forward.
But the University System of Georgia released a statement saying, quote, "At all 26 University System of Georgia institutions, race or ethnicity is not a determining factor in admissions." Georgia is one of 9 states that already prohibit any consideration of race in admissions to their public colleges and universities. So let's run the table. Everybody take a deep breath. Here we go. Janelle, to you first this week. Just want to kind of get your thoughts on this ruling.
Okay. I felt like this was finally a step towards actual equality, because my issue with affirmative action is the quotas. When you look at the data, there's a chart that I recently saw that showed that over the past 10 years, Black enrollment, particularly in Harvard, has stayed right around the 10 to 11 percentile. It hasn't grown at all. So that tells me that there are select slots that they have in place that they are offering. I feel like getting rid of affirmative action will open up the door to now have the opportunity to have more people apply, more people have the opportunity. I actually think that we should get rid of the whole ethnicity box, period, when it comes to enrolling into college. Why don't we just make it about the whole list of criteria? I know you mentioned the 26 other criteria that they have to get in, the well-rounded student, academics, everything. If we remove ethnicity out of the conversation, I think we'll have an increase and show more Black students, more minority students enrolling in these schools, rather than just having the select few. And my issues also, out of the criteria, I looked at another piece of data that showed that less than 1% of the Black students that are at Harvard are there for any other reason other than ethnicity. When it comes to every other thing, I think it was 0.67% of those students were there because of academics. Everything else was because of race. We've got to do better.
Theron, you bring us some personal perspective because your wife is a Harvard grad.
Yeah, and you know, the reason she got accepted to Harvard is because she had a working mom, a working dad who cared about her education. She had a choice to apply to Harvard, and yeah, she got in because she had good grades, but more importantly, she went to a primarily white institution because they said, hey, we want to give people of African American race, Asian, Hispanic, an opportunity to come to this school. And so she got in, and she's a graduate, and she's a proud graduate. And these facts don't necessarily mean that because she and others have paved the way. Barack Obama went to Harvard because they applied because they want to have this education. But back to the decision. This is my point of view on this. At a time when we're trying to move this country forward, this moves the country backwards. That's number one. The other thing is that you look at Georgia, many people were surprised that race has been taken out of the criteria, and it's one of 20 plus, 26 or so criteria that people use to determine whether you're going to admit someone into your institution. And so to strike down affirmative action, let's go into the why. the reason is not because many Republicans and other people thought it was unconstitutional. The problem is it's working. So when Janelle and I'm sure Phil are going to rattle off all these stats about how black enrollment is up, it's because of affirmative action that people have been able to apply. The other thing is that it's going to have a tremendous impact on parents and students who are right now 17, 18-year-olds in this country, 15 to 16, are thinking about applying to schools, right? And so they are saying, will I get in? Will I be able to have an opportunity to do so? So what this new ruling does, Lori, and it's, as always a federal ruling, it puts it back on the states. So now the states are going to have to decide, are they going to change their criteria? Are they going to comply to, now all it says is that you can't use race anymore, but that doesn't mean you can't be a institution that really strives for diversity. That doesn't mean that you can't still encourage Hispanic and Asian African Americans to apply.
We see that with Georgia State.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, hold on. Let me finish because you gave Janelle a lot of time. My point is that this is nothing but a politically motivated conservative stunt. And the thing is that I am so tired of people not wanting to give people an opportunity to get a good education. And the last thing I just want to say to these parents and these students, because that's sort of people that I'm thinking about, is that don't let this decision discourage you. Yes, you have some conservative Supreme Court justices who want to move this country back. They want to take away your ability to basically be able to work hard. And yes, you just happen to be black or Asian, Hispanic to apply. So I want to speak to those parents and those students and really encourage them to not let this ruling. And the last thing I'll say is this, guys, it wasn't so long ago.
We gotta move.
No, but it wasn't so long ago that we didn't even have a right to get into colleges and universities. So the fact that we got a debate of why affirmative action has worked in this country is just very sad.
Phil, let me ask you, because he keeps bringing up Asian students, but it's the Asian students who actually filed the suits.
Right.
No, let me be very clear.
Well,
I'm bringing up black students first because I'm a black man, but Asian students are the people who are the beneficiaries of affirmative
about
action.
equality.
The plaintiffs.
Yeah, I'm all about equality.
Okay.
Every show I'm about equality.
It was two universities, one a public, one a private, and the plaintiffs were talking about fairness. These are the key words that I think people ought to take away from this. Theron, you always talk about the 14th Amendment and what it granted. You don't like equal protection under the law? That's what it was. Yeah, I've heard you say it.
No, yeah.
The 14th Amendment is what this ruling was all about, equal protection under the law. It's about fairness. It's against discrimination. You forgot to mention the word discrimination, Theron. It's called leveling the field. Well, this is not the 1950s and 60s anymore in America.
It feels like it.
We've evolved, and so here we go. We've got now a roadmap for the future in a very increasingly diverse constitutional republic.
Melita, give us your perspective.
Well, it's very interesting to me that a footnote by Justice Roberts carved out the military academies from this opinion because the military sees the need to have a completely diverse set of officers to rise to the top of military command. So it's very interesting that they are carved out. The other thing is that the flip side of this coin is that these institutions will still be allowing legacy students and donor students a big carve out. And that is a special class of discrimination against everyone else. And it particularly impacts and the privileged, say, white men who predominated those institutions generations ago. So I think there's a lot to unpack in the decision, but it's interesting to me that Emory said the diversity in their student body is free of inquiry, encourages the kind of dialogue that their students will face in society as a whole. So diversity is still important, and colleges and universities are going to have to find other ways to ensure diversity.
Janelle, you wanted to address the military part, but I also want you to just touch on the student loans, because the Supreme Court also struck down President Biden's student loan payback program.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all know when it comes to student loans, I mean, everyone signed on that line knowing it was a loan. No one was told it was a grant, so you just have to pay it back, and I understand that. When it comes to the military academy, you know, Kelvin went to a military academy, he went to the Air Force Academy, and in order to get in there, regardless of what the color of your skin is, you have to meet heavy criteria. I mean, his grades had to be in a certain place, he had to get 2 congressional recommendations. I mean, the list goes on and on. So that I kind of understand where they were going when it comes to that. Now, you mentioned the ability to apply, that affirmative action increased the ability for black people to apply, and that's just not true. Affirmative action has nothing to do with your ability to apply. You can apply anywhere you want at any time, no matter what the color of your skin is. And lastly, I do understand the good intentions associated with affirmative action in 1960s. I understand why this happened, but we've got to get to a place where we realize that our good intentions are no longer serving us. It's no longer working in our behalf. And I like to see what's going to happen as a result of this. I think we're going to see an increase of Black participation.
Darren, you can respond to that, and then I want to just touch quickly on the student loans then after.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that this ruling pretty much assumes that there's no bias and how the criteria is put in place to admit students, right? And I just think
it
that
removes the bias.
No, but there is no. The point is that this decision basically says that it infers that there's no bias in when you're looking at applicants and their admissions, right? And so what I'm saying to you is that I believe, back to what Melita said, these colleges and universities have to make sure that they are making a step towards diversity. And one of the things that you have to do when you are trying to be a diverse institution, you have to look at the issue of race. And so to remove this now and say, hey, you can't use that anymore, to me, it's places like Georgia State and other places that are saying, hey, we're graduating the most African Americans, but I'm sure that African Americans feel comfortable going there. The last thing I want to say, I go back to the parents. We're unfortunately, we all have graduated, we're out, but we do have children, and a lot of these children are deciding to go. You're going to also see a drop and people being able to go for financial aid and to be able to go to colleges and be accepted because of this ruling. The last thing I want to say is that I'm a proud HBCU grad, and Janelle's a proud HBCU grad as well. And so, did affirmative action get me into Clark Atlanta University? Maybe not. But my point is that I have so many friends. I mean, our mayor, I think if he was sitting here right now, he would tell you, I got into Georgia Tech because of affirmative action. So to just say that affirmative action is not needed and that we progressed so much for 50 years ago, I just think it's just disingenuous. But ultimately, this fight is going to be at the states, and we're going to win it.
All right, I got 15 seconds each.
Okay.
Go ahead, Phil.
I think Chief Justice of the Supreme Court John Roberts said it best. The best way to end discrimination is to end discrimination.
Exactly.
And that is the problem. University of Georgia has 35% minority students without race-based quotas.
Right.
Well, within the
It's
university
11%.
system as a whole,
Right.
there are only 25.2% Black students when the state population is 33% Black.
We got to look at our high schools. We got to look at what's happening in our high schools. We got to address the fact that we have so many failing schools and that we won't push for school choice that allows parents to be able to put their kids in better high schools so that they can have better grades. That allows them to have a better opportunity.
I got to leave it there, everybody. I'm sorry. Up next, several new laws are now in effect in Georgia, including a ban on gender confirmation surgery for minors and stricter gang sentences.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
A ban on gender confirmation surgery for minors, stricter gang sentences, and new changes to how students learn to read. Those are just a few of the new laws that are now in effect in Georgia. And Phil, I think one that got some of the most debate bans healthcare providers from providing hormonal or surgical treatments to align with their gender identity. We're already seeing lawsuits filed in Georgia over this one.
Right, no surprise there. But what the intent of all of this is to protect children. And mutilation is one thing that cannot be changed. And so I think that's a great law. I tell you what, my favorite new law, though, is the lemonade stand law.
That's a good
that anybody under the age of 18 can operate a stand and have non-alcoholic beverages and prepackaged food and no permit from the darn government.
No permit needed. Melita.
Well, the gender law, the federal lawsuit that Phil mentioned, has stopped. Similar lawsuits have stopped laws in Kentucky, Tennessee, and Arkansas already. And so it'll be very interesting to see how quickly a federal judge rules on the Georgia case.
All right, well, moving on, the AJC reported this week that Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger met with federal prosecutors investigating efforts by Donald Trump and his allies to overturn the 2020 election. Theron, it probably doesn't come as much of a surprise that Raffensperger is cooperating with the U.S. Justice Department.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the Secretary of State's got a lot to say. He's been in the news lately around sort of his Republicans calling on him to actually act now and sort of some what they perceive some of the glitches, some of the challenges with the voting machines. And so now for him to sort of comply and say, hey, I want to testify and give what I can give to sort of this saga that never goes away about Trump trying to overturn democracy. And so I think the Secretary of State is going to be honest, and I think he's going to provide his perspective.
Well, in a letter to state lawmakers, Secretary Raffensperger is also calling on them to to pass stiffer laws for election interference. Raffensperger is pushing to make it a felony, carrying a minimum sentence of 10 years if someone is caught tampering with Georgia's election system. Janelle.
Well, I think when it comes to this subject, there's two apologies that are in order, because particularly one is coming from Brad Raffensperger. He, during the whole 2020 election debacle, he continued to say, nothing is wrong, nothing is wrong. Clearly, something is wrong. The other apology needs to go towards Dominion, to the actual machine, because it's the software that's the problem, and that's a totally different vendor, so we kind of killed a business for no reason. However, I think that seeing him come out now and saying, oh, there is something, I'm going to put my foot down. Why didn't you do that the first time? I mean, we've all waited for this. So now it's just kind of disingenuous and like you're just kind of gearing up for whatever race is probably coming up in 2026.
Is it too little, too late, Melita?
Well, what he's doing is trying to deflect attention away from the obvious problems caused by the Coffee County breach and deny that there is a problem and turn attention in a different direction. I think it'll be great to make it more of a felony to compromise the machines, but they need to do something about the machines that have been compromised.
Phil, you've been very critical of the Secretary of State over this issue.
Well, that's right. I think this is a fig leaf. I actually agree. I think this is a deflection from some of the very serious problems we talked about last week and the week before. The fact that the experts in cybersecurity have said the system is not secure. Raffensperger kept saying, to Janelle's point, everything was fine and secure after 2020. It was not.
All right. Coming up, DeKalb's district attorney recuses herself from prosecuting folks charged in cases related to the Atlanta Public Safety Training Center.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
DeKalb County District Attorney Sherry Boston has announced that she is withdrawing from the prosecutions of all current cases related to the Atlanta Public Safety Training Center in unincorporated DeKalb County. The Georgia Attorney General's office will handle the prosecution of the pending cases. Theron, your thoughts?
I think this was a philosophical difference as far as like how do you sort of prosecute. I think it's roughly about 42 protesters, and the charges go from domestic terrorism, and I think there was also charges that RICO Act. And so what the district attorney is saying is, because of this philosophical difference and because she wanted to have the time to take it case by case, she was saying, hey, I'm going to withdraw from this. Now, this does not mean that she doesn't think that some of these people have committed bad crimes and domestic terrorism should be considered. But she's also saying that she will definitely prosecute future cases. And so this was, a word that I used that Phil loved, and that was this multi-jurisdictional sort of approach to this training facility issue. So what she did, she kind of broke up this multi-jurisdictional sort of coalition temporarily. And I think, honestly, she wanted to have the time to basically look at these cases and make sure that the charges were appropriate. Now, this does not mean that the Attorney General cannot go prosecute these cases himself. And that is something that I think that he's strongly considering. Maybe Phil or Janelle knows that that's something he's going to do.
Phil.
Well, I think that she could have still stayed in the multi-jurisdictional mode here, Karen. And yes, Attorney General Chris Carr is doing the right thing. I mean, we're talking about terrorism charges. Sherry Boston, the DA, bent to the soft on crime crowd and the permissive crowd. Oh, gee, we shouldn't charge them with terrorism. Wait a minute. They're trying to kill law enforcement officers. They're throwing Molotov cocktails. They're promoting vandalism. It should be terrorism charges.
She did say some of it.
Well, she recused herself. And thank goodness we have an Attorney General with the spine that's going to go after radicals.
Melita.
Well, I think it remains to be seen how many of these people will eventually be charged by the Attorney General. Sherry Boston in particular called out a Southern Poverty Law Center legal observer wearing a vest identifying him as a legal observer who was arrested anyway and charged with domestic terrorism. There has been a long-standing policy not to arrest legal observers at protests, not to arrest the priests who are there, identified as priests at protests. And so Chris Carr is doubling down and going beyond the normal previous protocols.
We'll see what happens with those cases. Dr. Rochelle Walensky's last day on the job as the head of the Atlanta-based Centers for Disease Control and Prevention was Friday. She submitted her resignation, saying the waning of the COVID-19 pandemic was a good time to make a transition. Janelle?
So our issue with Dr. Walensky is that she's inconsistent, right? So it wasn't the role, it wasn't her ability to do the role, it was the fact that she didn't do it well. She was inconsistent. A lot of things that she said. So there was a statement that came out where she said that data has emerged, again, that demonstrates that even if you were infected during the post-vaccination, that you can't give it to anyone else. Well, that was clearly wrong. She also said things like natural immunity was like an education factor, but it's not necessarily a natural thing, or it's not something we really should take seriously, and that's not true either. I'm glad that she resigned, or she's stepping down, because either way, she either needed to be fired or resigned, because she has so many inconsistencies, and that affected so many people's lives.
Well, Theron, this was an unprecedented COVID-19 that we haven't seen, so we kind of were learning as we went. But I will say, I mean, the biggest criticism I would have is over the communication. It was just horrible communication throughout.
So we're not criticizing her education. We're not criticizing her career and being an expert in this field. We're not criticizing that this woman stepped up and actually dealt with one of the probably in the history of our time, the largest pandemic, the biggest crisis we've ever had to face from a medical and health standpoint. And so I want to commend her for doing the best job she could. Now, everybody we talk about on this show could do a better job of communications. But what I liked about Director Walensky is that, look, she didn't shy away. She said, look, I made a mistake. This is the new data. And I just want to commend her for her work.
All right. Well, Dr. Christine King Ferris, the esteemed educator, civil rights activist, and author, has died. She was 95 years old. The King Center announced that Ferris died peacefully in Atlanta on Thursday morning with her family by her side. Of course, she was the only surviving sibling of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Melita.
Well, she was such an elegant, dignified presence with those beautiful hats at every MLK celebration and at many gatherings at Ebenezer Church. And she was such a strong presence for the entire King family. She was with Coretta Scott King at the airport when Mayor Ivan Allen had to tell her that Martin Luther King had died. She just is a strong force for that family, and the stories she had and shared, she'll be missed by so many. Phil.
Well, I think she has a great legacy. Obviously, she was one of the co-founders of the King Center. I remember hearing some of her speeches. In fact, she even said, Theron, that, we've come a long way in just the last 50, 60 years. We've evolved. And so rest in peace.
He had to go there, Theron.
Don't do that. Don't disrespect that woman.
No disrespect.
Well, because what she was saying,
but
if she was sitting here, she would totally disagree with you on all the things that you said about affirmative action. Because she, too, and her brother and the family
Don't put words in her
big.
mouth.
No, I know. I know where her heart, and I know what she's standing. But no, here's the thing. One of the things that I'm going to miss the most is I got a chance to speak to her briefly when President Joe Biden came to Ebenezer Baptist Church, and it was very, very fitting that the entire church stopped because she was a little late, and at 90 plus, you can come anytime you want to. But the thing that everyone is going to talk about with Dr. King Ferris is that her grace, her just always a lady, a constant professional, a wonderful woman who was committed to Spelman College and really continuing the legacy of her brother and her family, and always just supported that church until the very last day.
Final thoughts, 10 seconds, Janelle, sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm just grateful for all the positive contributions that have come, and my heart and prayers goes out to the family.
All right, we'll leave it there. Coming up, winners and losers, everyone, stay tuned.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
All right, Janelle, we'll start with you.
All right, so my winner this week is Captain Ralph Woodfolk, who is with the Atlanta Police Department. He went on Fox America Newsroom this past week, and he talked about Operation Heatwave, which is something that the APD is pushing out now in order to crack down on crime. They're going to be using weapon defense data to target high crime areas, which I think is wonderful. And what I love the most is that he said, we're going to meet you where you are, and that he's working with the judge and jurisdiction, those areas, and there won't be any bond for people who are arrested through this program. So we don't have to worry about them getting back on crime. So that, and the Supreme Court is also my winner for finally issuing us into a non-discrimination when it comes to our university.
Theron.
All right, my first winners are going to be Greg and Sharice Sheely. Saw them on the plane ride down to Miami last week when I was down on the show. Also want to make Shay Alexander a winner. She's going to be the new Fulton County Clerk of Superior and Magistrate Courts. And also want to give a big shout out to Tina Robinson, who retired, who Shay's replacing for her outstanding decades of service. Of course, Christine King Ferris is definitely a winner. And then my loser, which I haven't had a loser in a very, very long time, is absolutely those 6 justices who voted to overturn affirmative action.
I thought you were going to say Phil.
You said we got a policy. We don't personally attack people and call them losers, so I wouldn't do that.
I know there's love here between us, Theron. But no, my winners, yes, are the 6 courageous Supreme Court justices. But it's also the 30th anniversary of the lottery, and we've all talked about all of it. It's $26.5 billion since its inception to go to all of the Hope Scholarship folks. And you know, my winner is Ray's on the River and founder Ray Schoenbaum. It's the iconic restaurant right on the border on the Chattahoochee River there with Cobb and Fulton counties. And a shout out to some of the staff. He's got a great staff there. Troy, Blythe, and Jessica.
And I saw that they gave a car to one of their...
They gave a car to a longtime employee
waitress
who had just retired. So Ray is a generous guy.
That's wonderful. All right, Melita.
Well, my condolences to the family of George Hury Jr., who was killed by a falling tree in his Garden Hills neighborhood. It's a great, warm Atlanta family, and I've known 3 generations of that family over 4 decades. And then another winner for this week is the candidates for office, because the State Ethics Commission has approved caregiving expenses as legitimate campaign expenses, and it was sponsored, the request was sponsored in a bipartisan way.
All right, make it a great and wonderful and safe July 4th, everybody. See you next week.